Right now, I am walking a piece of ground that should be familiar to you if you've watched this channel for any amount of time. This is the Bulge, which is just a short distance from the town of Foix, which was on the Bastogne perimeter during the Battle of the Bulge. Many people are familiar with the Bulge from its association with the book and series Band of Brothers. So Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment arrived here on the 21st of December of 1944. What people may not realize is that they weren't the first ones here. There was some vicious fighting that had taken place here prior to the arrival of Easy Company. So a lot of people go to these woods and they call it the Easy Company foxholes. It's not just Easy Company. They replaced H Company. And the reason that they were here on the outskirts of Foix is because this had served as a fallback position for another group of soldiers who had gone through some vicious fighting up in a place called Noville.
I arrived in Bastogne just as night was falling. I found a MP who led me to Colonel Robert C.P. It was a very brief meeting, and Colonel Robert C.P. told me that O'Hara had been sent out to the east of the town and was in a defensive position, and that Cherry was moving out slightly to the northeast of the town. And as soon as my column arrived, I was to keep moving and move to the north of the town to a little place called Noville. If there were any Germans in Noville, I was to knock them out of the town and to occupy it. If there were no Germans, I was to occupy Noville, going no further north, because this would be the limit of the range of the 10th Armored Division artillery, which was located in the vicinity of Bastogne.
This then was the disposition of Combat Command B on the 18th of December, the night of their arrival in Bastogne. Team Desobry was at Noville. Team Cherry at Longbilly. Team O'Hara at Warden. The total strength of the three defending units was about 75 tanks and 2,800 officers and men. Battering at the gates of Bastogne were the advance elements of General Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army and General Brandenberger's 7th Army. Approximately 300 tanks and 50,000 men, whose mission, in addition to taking Saint-Vit and Wilt, was to take Bastogne, and to take it fast.
We have moved up to the town of Noville, and after the war, the 101st Airborne commander in Bastogne, Anthony McCullough, said that the paratroopers really got a lot of the credit for the defense of Bastogne, and that there was another division that deserved just as much recognition, and that was the 10th Armored. The 10th Armored Division was actually the first ones to get to Bastogne. And when they got here, Combat Command B, under the leadership of a guy by the name of Colonel Roberts, separated into 3 different teams that were each named after their commander. So to the southeast was Team O'Hara. Team Cherry got deployed to the east, and Team Desobry got sent right up here to Noville, and there was going to be one whale of a fight that happened here on December 19th and 20th. So we are standing right in the middle of Noville, and I want to take a moment while we are here by the church to kind of orient us as to where we are and talk about why this was such an important location. So here in Noville, you have the junction of a few different roads, which made this a strategically important spot for both the Germans and the Americans. So off in this direction right here, which is kind of off to the east, is the direction of Bulge. To the north here takes you to Houffalize, and then this road right here takes you to Vaux. And if you can take Noville, well, then you can take this road right down to the junction at Bastogne. So it was very important for the 10th Armored, once they got up here, to hold this at all costs. And Desobry, when he was talking to Colonel Roberts, said, hey, if I get into a pinch, do I have permission to withdraw on my own authority? And Roberts told him, he's like, hey, it's going to be bad up there, and you're going to probably want to. You basically need to hold at all costs. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here. So Desobry, when he gets up here, is going to put his first command post in this school right here. I've moved up to what during the battle would have been the north edge of town. And here in this open area, there's not much that's here right now. But in 1944, the town cemetery was right here. Now, the battle that swept through here in late December and then again in early January would wipe this cemetery out. So there's not really a whole lot here. But on the morning of the 19th, about 10 o'clock in the morning, Desobry came up to about this position. There were some soldiers that were up here. They also had a 57 millimeter anti-tank gun. And he was looking around, taking stock of the situation. There was a heavy, heavy fog that was blanketing the area. And there's a couple things about Noville. One of the big disadvantages of trying to fight here is you're basically fighting down in a bowl. I've got my buddy Phil Russo with me today. He interviewed a lot of A Company veterans from the 506th. And he said the veterans who were here said it was like being in a stadium. And you're on the field and the Germans are up in the stands all shooting down at you. Well, about that time on the 19th, there was off on the Bulge Road an element of the 10th Armored that had set up a roadblock. You got guys that are filtering in from the 9th Armored and the 28th. So there was some confusion, about, okay, are these Germans or are these Americans who are coming in? Well, a German recon unit on half tracks came in, fire opened up over there. About that time, the fog started to lift like a curtain, and underneath that curtain to the north on these ridges around us were 30 German tanks.
We completed establishing the defenses of Noville about midnight. Actually, the defense was a routine, traditional type defense. We set out roadblocks to the east, one to the north, and one to the northwest, because these were the directions that we expected the Germans to attack us. The fighting throughout the night was sporadic. It was a piecemeal attack. They would hit us with small units from the north, and then they'd hit us with small units from the east.
So in talking about all of the fighting that happened here, as the Germans are closing in, as you can imagine, there are just bullets and artillery flying all over the place, right through these streets. And right here by the church was this World War I memorial. And if you look, well, you can still see the evidence of the battle in the form of this battle damage to this monument. So the fighting here in Noville for Team Desobry was going to be getting very, very intense. Desobry thought that he was up against a reinforced tank battalion, when in fact he was about ready to face the entire 2nd Panzer Division with just about 400 guys. So the fighting here was about as bad as you could possibly imagine, and he was thinking about withdrawing south to the town of Foix. So he called back, talked to the commanding officer, and was told, if you can hold out just a little bit longer, I've got the 1st Battalion of the 506 that has just arrived that I can send up. So Desobry thought, okay, if we can hold out just a little bit longer, maybe these paratroopers can come up, and then they could attack the heights here around Noville. So again, we are looking to the south toward Bastogne right now, and the men from 1st Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment under the leadership of Leprade are going to be coming up in this direction right here. Now, once they get to the middle of town, C Company is going to head off in this direction towards Bulge, and then B Company is going to kind of head off to the left of the road, and A Company is going to head off a little bit to the right of the road. And one of the men who was in A Company was Don Burgett, and he left a really good account of his time here in Noville. We got a little bit of traffic noise going on. Anyway, one of the stories that Don Burgett told is that when he got here into town, he saw this Jeep as he was making his way up, and there was a dead soldier from the 10th Armored that was hanging off of it. And he said, in the ditch, I don't know if it was exactly along this road, but he said in the ditch for 100 yards there was water, and the water was red from this guy's blood. Another story that he told was that in the middle of the fighting, it would have been right up here in this area on the other side of the cemetery. There was a soldier who had been hit just terribly bad in the abdomen, and as he was walking, his intestines were being dragged behind him. So they went and got the guy. Burgett gets his raincoat out, lays it down on the ground, pours water in it, and him and another guy sat and washed this poor man's guts and picked all of the large pieces of debris out of it, and then packed his intestines back into his abdomen, and then got him to an aid station. So the fighting here in Noville was just as bad as it gets.
I am General Anthony McAuliffe, United States Army retired. I was at Bastogne with the 101st Airborne Division in mid-December 1944. The 101st Airborne Division was at a place called Camp Mourmelon, near the city of Reims in France. We were recuperating from the Holland Airborne operation, where we had suffered about 30% casualties, and we were absorbing our replacements and going through a training program. General Taylor had been recalled to Washington, and I was the acting commander of the division. I believe it was on December 18th that we received a telephone call from the Chief of Staff of the 18th Airborne Corps saying that the division should be prepared to move the following day to the north to the town of Verbemont. We had known that the Germans had attacked, but we didn't know the extent of the attack or the conditions to the north. But we made all preparations to get away the following day, and the first thing in the morning I preceded the division to the north in a sedan with my aide-de-camp and my operations officer. As I drove north, I reached a crossroad just a couple of miles west of the town of Bastogne. I knew that 8th Corps headquarters was located in that town, so I decided to drive over to that Corps headquarters and try to learn something more about the situation. It was fortunate that I did so, because I learned from the Corps commander, General Middleton, that the orders for the 101st Airborne Division had been changed, and that the division would come to Bastogne rather than to go to Verbemont. I also met there Colonel Roberts, who was the commander of Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, who were already on the scene and already in the fighting.
Desobry was attacked about 5 or 6 times that first day. He will describe during the morning of that first day, one battalion under Colonel Praed of the 101st Airborne joined him. They, as soon as Colonel Praed joined, they decided to attack. Apparently at the same time, the Germans decided to attack.
At 1400 hours, the paratroopers and our tanks and our armored infantry launched the attack. At 1400 hours, the German forces launched an all-out attack on Noville. So we had the situation of the Germans and the American units attacking one another simultaneously from points about 700 yards distant. Actually, the Germans were stopped. They withdrew back behind the ridge. Our paratroopers on the northwest of the town actually gained the ridge. The tanks, the armored infantry, and the paratroopers on the northeast of the town were unable to get to their positions. So after a fight of about 45 minutes or an hour, we withdrew the paratroopers from the northeast back into the town of Noville.
I've moved back up to the location where the cemetery was here in Noville. And when the 506, the 1st Battalion of the 506 got here to Noville, well, A company was going to be right here in this area. And there was some vicious fighting that took place right around here in the location of this cemetery. Now, one of the men who was in the fight here at the cemetery was a private by the name of Steve Polander. And in his book, Alamo in the Ardennes, which I highly recommend, John McManus recounts a story where he is crouched down next to the wall of the cemetery and a tank round hits right above him and pretty much knocks him silly. So he ends up making his way out of the cemetery and into a local barn, and when he gets inside the barn nearby, which I don't know where it would be exactly, I'm seeing a barn just on the outside of this cemetery, could possibly be from the war, but maybe not because a lot of structures were destroyed. But anyway, he gets into this barn and there is another soldier that is lying in the barn and basically has a chunk of his skull that has been blown off, and he said that he could actually see his exposed brain, and there was a medic that was working on him. Now, like I said, there's no cemetery here now, but if you look over in this corner, well, there's some evidence of the fighting that took place here in the form of these crushed gravestones. And then on this one here, we can clearly see some bullet strikes. I'm here with Eric and Phil, and Eric just pointed out some more battle damage on one of these surviving structures here in the cemetery. So, yeah, this is definitely a place that you would not have wanted to have been in December of 1944. So for the guys of the 10th Armored and 1st Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the noose was getting tighter and tighter here in Noville. And earlier I mentioned how Desobry had his headquarters right up here in this school building. Well, he had actually moved his headquarters in the middle of the battle to this house right here. So Desobry and Leprade met up in this home to further discuss plans on what they were going to do. And there was a general who was also here. At some point during the battle, Colonel Sink arrived and was at this headquarters. And Laprade, trying to reinforce this building to make it a little bit safer, took a big armoire and drug it across the floor and put it right up against one of the windows. Well, one of the guys who was in charge of, he was a maintenance officer who had been taking vehicles back and forth and running supplies and stuff like that, had parked his vehicle right here in front of this headquarters, and that was a mistake, because the Germans identified that this was probably headquarters. The vehicle that he was using kind of looked like a tank, and fire was called in. There was a tank that was off in this direction that pumped 2 rounds into this home. It went right through the armoire, collapsed the roof of the building. It killed Laprade and grievously wounded Desobry. As a matter of fact, it was said that, you know, he was like 6'3" and about 160 pounds. So he's a pretty large target inside of this building, and just got hit hard. Darn near knocked his eye out. One of the accounts that I read said that his eyeball was like out of the socket and kind of hanging down on his cheek. So both of the commanding officers were knocked out within just a few minutes right here in Noville.
Desobry was hit badly, and Colonel Prade was killed that evening. And I didn't know Desobry was hurt for 24 hours. He was later captured when the hospital was captured.
Here at the crossroads, they have a monument to the men of the 10th Armored Division and the 101st Airborne Division who fought here in Noville to hold off the Germans. As a matter of fact, if we go right up here, you can see that the name of this road is Rue du General Desobry. And then down below it says, the General U.S. William R. Desobry, 10th Armored Division, defended Noville in December 1944 with outstanding courage. And then right over here, we have another monument that says, never forget. And then up here it gives some information about the battle that took place here on the 19th and 20th of December of 1944. Now, Desobry, after the strike on the command post, would be dug out of the rubble and would be evacuated. When they got to Foix, they actually ran into a bunch of Germans. They saw that they were loaded up with wounded, and they just went ahead and waved them on. Desobry, unfortunately, would find himself going from one bad situation into another, as he ended up getting transferred over to the 326 Medical Battalion's area, which was overrun by the Germans the next day, and he ended up being taken prisoner. So, with Desobry and Laprade knocked out of the fight, they were replaced by 2 men named Harwick and Husted. Harwick with the 101st, Husted with the 10th Armored. And the fighting continued here, but it became obvious that they were not going to be able to hold out. And with this open ground all around them, the counterattack that had failed earlier in the fight kind of showed that they weren't going to be able to take the heights around this town, at least with the number of men that they had. So finally, they decided that it was time to withdraw back to Bastogne. The church here in the background was rigged up with explosives and ordnance to basically cause a collapse into the street and create a bunch of rubble that would create a bit of a roadblock for the Germans. In the meantime, the Germans had cut off this highway between here and Foix. But miraculously, right in the middle of the day, just as these men were about ready to bail out, a thick blanket of fog descended over this area and helped to mask their movement as they made their way out of Noville. So again, you hear a lot about the Bastogne perimeter and things like that. This is a fight that maybe is not as well known, but was vital in preparing a defensive perimeter in the Battle of Bastogne.